But let's look at some of the others. So what are these? We've got a tangent constraint. Well, let me delete this constraint and pull it back out. A tangent constraint, let's suppose we had, I'm going to place our box base from the previous chapter. Okay, now suppose we wanted this tube to be rolling on this plane here. We wanted it to sit on this plane. Well, a mate constraint wouldn't really do it, because you would have to pick a circular surface, and the only thing a mate will do, as you've just seen, if you choose a mate or flush constraint on a circular surface, it will automatically use the axes. So it's mated the axes to this flat surface, which isn't what we wanted. So how do you get it to sit on there? Well, we can use this tangent constraint. Now we can select tangent constraint. Select tangent, and you have two options here. So we could have we could select our surface here to sit on there, like so. And now, if we look, we've joined a circular surface with a flat surface. Okay. We can also, with tangent constraint, we can join a circular surface with another circular surface. So maybe you wanted to stick these two. Supposing you had two pipes and you wanted, they were kind of welded together down the middle. That's how you would do it. Okay. If we edit this constraint by right-clicking, with two circular objects, you also have this option, which looks a bit like insert, but you can see it's one surface. It's actually, it's hard to see, but it's made the surfaces flush. This option, which will make the surfaces flush inside. So yeah, I can't offhand remember where I've used that. I'm sure I have some for something. Okay, and other constraints we have angle constraint. So maybe you wanted this to be at a different angle to this axis here. Okay, so you can select these two axes and you can select 45 degrees, and now these items will be at 45 degrees. Some way you might use this is if you were to bring in, let me just delete this. We're not actually creating any kind of object here, so it does look a bit of a mess. I'm just trying to demonstrate the different constraints. Okay, but let's, if we right click this, copy, and then click paste, we can bring in another instance of that. Okay, supposing you were making some kind of welded frame, it might be that this part of the frame meets this one at 45 degrees. Okay, and then you could angle those. You would also need to you would also need, in this case, to have them on the same plane. So let's turn on. If you're going to mate these two circular objects, you want to be using the plane. So we'll have that plane and that plane flush. Okay, there. And because you've set that angle on the angular constraint, you can see you end up with a frame joint of 45 degrees, and you might change that later to 30. Okay, so we'll just look at it from here to see it taking effect. So maybe you want that to be 30. Okay, and you can see it's now 30. You would need another degree, something else to fix it to get this orientation and everything, but hopefully that's enough to see how you would have two frames, two angles, but hopefully you can see from that how the angular constraint works. We've angled these two axes. Okay, let's edit that again. When you do an angle constraint, you have different solutions, basically the directions. The one we've used here is we've put an angle between the two axes. You might want to use that. Okay, so that's angle constraint. Okay, now Inventor has a frame generator. If you were doing this kind of thing, it can be easier to use a frame generator. You can automatically cut the kind of fish mouthing that you need to weld circular joints. It can do all that. That's more advanced Inventor that we'll look at. In a more advanced course, but for now I just want to show you these different constraints, and that's the angular constraint. So we've looked at the tangent constraint, the angle constraint, insert constraint, and the mate constraint we know. Okay, now there is other constraints. You can get motion constraint, transitional constraints. They're more advanced, we'll look at them later. For now, the main building blocks of creating basic assemblies are your mate constraint, both the mate and flush part of mate constraint, and the angle constraint and the insert constraint. Okay, so with those and your part modeling, you can come up with a huge number of assemblies for machines, for wooden carpentry, for plastics, for your 3D printer, all sorts of things. And we'll go into more details about some of those later on, and there will be other courses specialising in things like 3D printing. But for now, that will set you in good stead to create a huge number of objects and assemblies. But you might be thinking, well, okay, how about fixing things together? What about nuts and bolts and that kind of thing? What about standard pieces of tube or steel work, all those kind of things? You have to draw each one. Well, no, you don't. And that is all. An Inventor has a huge catalogue of objects that it comes with that you can use, called a content center. So in the next chapter, we're going to look at the content center and add in some fixings. Okay.